Okay, let's try that again. I didn't even pay attention to the microphone being muted, so hopefully you can hear me now. Um, so the mic is unmuted now, so hopefully it's coming through. Okay, good. Okay, so have my little onlooker to help me out with things like that. Okay, so today is Easter Sunday, and we are celebrating. We're celebrating the resurrection of Christ. That's what we do for Easter. That's what Easter is all about. Um, and it's kind of funny because Christmas and Easter. Christmas is the beginning, um, and then Easter is kind of the technically the ending because it's the story of Christ's birth at Christmas and the resurrection at Easter. So, anyway, today is Easter Sunday, and today we're going to be looking at John chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. And this is the sermon's entitled, Because He Lives, We Can Rise Too, or Re-Rise Too. So, when we look at the passage, we read John 20 verses. We're actually starting at 11 because reading 1 through 18, I mean, I would take up the whole time just trying to have a sermon. By the way, we are trying to figure out how to simulcast on YouTube and Facebook. It's going to cost a little bit, so I've got to figure that out. And trying to figure out exactly how to have a worship time at the beginning. That is the goal. So hopefully, in a couple of weeks, we'll have music. But as of right now, we're not quite there yet. So when resurrection meets real life, John 20 verses actually 11 through 18. The story is told 1 through 18, and just so you know, this is after Mary has come to the tomb. Mary has entered the tomb, found that Jesus is not there. She has told the disciples have gone away. And now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus's body had been, one at the head, one at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" Now, I do want to mention the Greek word for woman is not when you read it that way in the English translation. It kind of has a connotation of woman, why, kind of getting onto her, but the Greek language doesn't say that. It would be more like someone saying, "Lady, are you okay?" That's kind of the context of what we're reading here. So they say, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize it was Jesus. He asked her, same question, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. And Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended." Sorry, my screens are kind of covering each other. "Ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them what he had said, that he had said these things to her. And so when we read this passage, it's probably one of the most impactful passages in the entire resurrection story. We know that basically the resurrection story started on Friday. Jesus was taken before the Sanhedrin, taken before the keepers of the law, and finally Pilate, all Friday morning. And then at around 9 a.m., he was crucified. He was taken and he was hung up on a cross. And they say that by about 3 in the afternoon is when Jesus died. That's when his body gave out. That's when he passed away. And what's interesting about this story is that historically, it would take days for these people to die on the cross, because a lot of people, they would continue to struggle to breathe. They would continue to do everything they could, and finally, after 2 to 3 days of hanging on a cross, they would die. And it was a very cruel punishment, because it it basically caused people to fear. Now, that being said, we know that in the story, because the possibility of this lasting for several days, the religious leaders came to Pilate and said, "Hey, listen, um, tonight's our Sabbath. We're preparing for Sabbath. We want them to have expired before then." And so they broke the knees of the two thieves so that they would die. And they went to break the knees of Jesus, but find out that Jesus was actually already dead. So they stabbed him in the side, and they did this as a way to ensure that he was dead. And so when we read the story of the resurrection of Christ, it's actually a 3 day process. And we don't really know what happened with the disciples and Mary during that middle day, but we know that in the beginning, they were with him watching the crucifixion, and now they're going to be with him again at the resurrection. And we know that Mary has gone actually to take care of the Lord's body, but in the process, she finds that he has risen. And Easter is such an important day to the church, and it has such a familiar story. But many times, all we see is the glory of Easter. We don't see that time of disruption, that thing that Easter, that the first Easter actually did. Many times when we look at the birth of Christ, all we see is the glory of his birth. We don't see the real life fact that he was being born in a stable, and his mother was going through pain, and we don't see those parts. All we see are the glorified part that the Bible presents. And so when we see the resurrection of Christ, that's all we see. But as most of us know, the resurrection Sunday, the Easter Sunday, is when the majority of people attend church. And that's the time. It's like Easter and Mother's Day are the 2 days that people visit churches. And the reason is because they're there because they have been taught throughout their life. They are there to celebrate the resurrection of Christ. But most of the time, we don't see what Christ's crucifixion actually did to his followers. We don't see the turmoil and the sadness that they felt. We say things like Christ is risen with confidence, and we're the first. We don't realize the first people to encounter the resurrected Christ didn't have confidence at all. There was no confidence in Mary's tone. There was no confidence in John and Peter whenever they were looking for Christ and realized that his body wasn't there. There was no confidence whenever Mary ran back to the disciples and told them, "Hey, listen, his body's been moved. We don't know what they did with him," and they ran. There was no confidence there. Well, all we see in the story is this confident, resurrected Christ. But in fact, the first people to encounter Christ after the resurrection, they weren't excited. Now, they may have become excited whenever they realized it was Jesus, but instead, they met this day with confusion. They met this day with fear, with grief. They met this day with exhaustion. I mean, can you imagine? You follow this guy for at least 3 years. The Bible presents it as 3 years. They followed him for about 3 years, and during this time, they followed him everywhere. And now he's dead, and there's no way they could follow him to death, but they were scared that they would follow him to death. They were scared that the religious leaders were going to come capture them too. They were going to take them and put them on trial. They were very frightened in this time. They were filled with grief. They were filled with the exhaustion from the day, from Friday, from the crying, from the whole situation. And a lot of times in our lives, we kind of find ourselves in that type of fear, that type of exhaustion, that type of confusion. Easter is not just a holiday for people who have everything together. And a lot of times that's what we see. It's almost like this Facebook image of Easter, everybody dressed in their beautiful dresses, everybody dressed in their suits and ties, everybody looking good going to church. And we don't see the argument that mom and dad had on the way to church. We don't see the fact that they struggled to get the kids together, get them dressed, get them in the car. We don't see the struggle of how am I going to pay my bills tomorrow? How am I going to take care of this? All we see is this beautiful picture of Christ. But Easter is not a holiday for people that have everything together. It is God's declaration that death does not have the final word. Death does not have the final word over our lives. It does not have the final word over us as people. The empty tomb is not just an ancient miracle. It's not just something that we think of as happening 2,000 years ago. Instead, it is an invitation for us, especially those of us who feel buried in everything, buried in the problems of life, buried in the stresses of life. It is the opportunity for us to realize that just as Jesus rose, we too can rise and be restored. So let's continue to look at our passage. So resurrection begins in the dark. Resurrection itself is not something that begins in the broad daylight of early morning. It's not something that begins in the happiness and the glory of the fact that Christ rose again. John's gospel centers on the resurrection story around Mary Magdalene. And this is a woman whose testimony the world would not have valued. The world would not have seen Mary Magdalene, even though she was faithful to God. She was fully trusted. She had one of the most impactful stories of anyone in the Bible. But as we know, Mary Magdalene's story is only mentioned a handful of times. Mary Magdalene, we know that Mary Magdalene was probably someone who, we know that she was delivered from demons. We know that. But we don't know much about her. A lot of people immediately put on this idea that Mary Magdalene was a prostitute. But the Bible doesn't tell us that. The Bible says nothing about her being a prostitute. Now, the Bible does talk about Mary, the sister of Lazarus, who anointed Jesus' feet. The Bible also talks about a woman, an unnamed woman that we don't know, that was brought before Jesus because she was caught in the act of adultery. And a lot of times people will confuse Mary Magdalene with one of those two characters. They will say, oh, well, this is really Mary that anointed Jesus' feet. But actually, that's Lazarus' sister. They say, oh, well, she was the woman who was caught in adultery and brought before Christ. But, the Bible doesn't say that either. The Bible does say that Mary Magdalene was a follower. She was a disciple of Christ. Why then is she not considered a disciple? Well, the first century church still lived in the first century. And because of that, they would not have considered a woman to be as important as the disciples. It would have been very difficult for them to truly see Mary Magdalene at the same level as John or James or Peter. But from what we can tell, there were many women that followed Jesus and the disciples. There were many people that continued to follow them no matter where they went. And we even read about 70 disciples, Many of which, when Jesus made the statement, I'm the bread of life, and if you come to me, you must eat of my flesh and drink of my blood, many of that 70 disciples actually left. And that's when Jesus asked Peter, so are you going to leave too? And Peter's like, Jesus, where are we going to go? The first century church would not have valued the testimony of Mary Magdalene. They wouldn't have done it. They wouldn't have valued it. She's, like I said, briefly even mentioned in the gospel stories. But she was the first person that came to the tomb. And the Bible actually tells us that it was early in the morning. So early that it may have still been dark outside. And I think that detail matters. I think that detail is important to us. Because a lot of times we want to think of Easter as the celebration of everybody living their perfect life but the resurrection of Christ didn't start in the bright daylight when everything was beautiful. The resurrection of Christ started in a darkened tomb. The resurrection of Christ started in a moment when there was no sun, when there was no light, when there was no belief, when the people were filled with doubt, when the people were filled with fear. And that's where Mary Magdalene finds herself. She wants to believe. She knows that Jesus said he's going to rise again. She knows that Jesus says that he's only going to be gone for a couple of days. But it's hard to believe that. It's hard to truly trust whenever you've just watched him be crucified. The resurrection story starts in the dark. It starts in a moment when society was darkened. It starts in a moment when the people were basically in the dark religiously because Jesus was gone and he was the light. The resurrection happened before that clarity came to light. Mary arrives expecting death. She expected to find Jesus. And if you remember, in the story, she was actually with other ladies, and they were coming to, they had no embalming. They had no undertaker to embalm the body. And so because of that, they would have it wrapped in a very tight sheet type thing. And they would have the body wrapped and they would stuff it with different herbs and different flowers and different things. And that's actually where the flowers at funerals come from, is the tradition of flowers with the dead body, because it helped to at least give another smell other than just death. She was expecting disappointment. She was coming to care for the Lord's body. She's probably coming to make sure that he was clean, to wash him, and to stuff these flowers and these herbs around him so that he would not stink. And so many times on Easter, we have this thought that because Christ is resurrected, that everyone there was excited and belief, but actually she was full of doubt. But she had the courage to keep walking. She could have turned around and went home. She could have turned around and went back to where she came from. She basically could have abandoned her faith in Christ. But instead, she continued to walk to the place to see Jesus. And when she gets there, she sees that the stone has been rolled away. And she doesn't immediately, and I love this part of the story, she doesn't immediately yell out, "Oh, Christ is risen. I see the stone is rolled away and Christ's body isn't there. So yay, he's risen." Instead, she panics. Because to her, she believes that someone, some unknown person, probably the Romans, came, or maybe the Jewish leaders, came and took his body. That's what she believed. There was no excitement. There was no joy. That He's Alive song that we all sing at or that we always hear played during the Easter season that makes it sound like it was more of an excitement. It wasn't. There was no excitement. There was no happiness, excitement of Jesus being risen. Instead, when Jesus's body wasn't there, they were fearful. And I think each and every one of us would have been. We would have found ourselves in a place that we wouldn't have felt triumphant. We wouldn't have felt happy and excited. Instead, we would have felt fear. If they've taken the Lord's body, then what are they going to do to us? We can do the story. She goes in, she sees the angels. And again, this is after she's already run and told the disciples. So she sees the angels, and the angels are like, "What are you doing?" And she's fearful, and she doesn't know what to say. She doesn't know what to do. And then she turns around and she sees this guy, and I can imagine he's probably, because we're talking early morning, and so I imagine he's kind of darkened silhouette from the sun being behind him, and all she can see is this darkened figure, and she thinks that it's the gardener out cutting the leaves and pruning things and taking care of the garden there where Jesus' body was laid. And she goes to him. He again asks, basically he said, "Ma'am, why are you crying?" That is the modern contextual way to understand what he said. Instead, it again, it wasn't a confrontational, condemning, "Woman, why are you crying?" It was more of a, "Ma'am, are you okay?" type reply to her. And she immediately says, "Sir, if you've taken his body, please tell me where you've taken him. I will go get him." The love that she had for Christ, the love that she had for Jesus was so big that she was going to go. And I don't picture this I don't picture this weightlifter type woman that can go carry a 200-pound man, but she was going to do it. She was going to go get his body. She was going to bring him back. And if you've ever had to pick up anything that isn't alive, that you're used to being alive, and whenever you go to pick that up, it's a lot heavier because there's no life in it to basically to help support its weight. And so because of that, she would have been literally carrying a probably 200-pound man, um, dead weight. I mean, it's, so when we see and picture this idea that she is to the point that she is going to go get the Lord's body and bring it back herself. I mean, she's going to do whatever she has to because she had such love for him. And I want you to notice with me, Jesus was not angry at her. Jesus didn't say, "Hey, why are you crying? I can't believe you doubted." He didn't say, "Woman, you're doubting me already? You've given up on everything you believed?" He didn't get onto her. He didn't condemn her. He didn't treat her poorly. Instead, he called her by name, just like he calls each and every one of us by name. He called her by name. He said, "Mary." He didn't give her a sermon. He didn't give her this long discourse. He didn't give her any type of theological argument or try to spread apologetics, or there was nothing to get on to her and rebuke her. He said her name. That was it. He said, "Mary." And as soon as he did, she recognized it. She recognized the tenderness in his voice. She recognized his tone, his demeanor. In my thought, I can imagine about that point is when he kind of turns to the side and the light's no longer at his back and she can see his face. I've actually heard preachers say that Jesus had disguised himself to where nobody would recognize him, but I don't believe that. I believe that it's just the fact that he was walking towards her and his back was towards the sun. And if you've ever looked into the sun with something coming at you, it's dark. You can't really see details. And that's what I picture with Mary and Jesus. And he comes to her and he wants to take her hand or wants to show her compassion, but he knows that it's not the time for that. And so she wants to grab onto him. She tries to reach out for him. And he says, Mary, you can't hold on to me because I have not ascended yet. See, resurrection becomes real the moment that she realizes who it was. Resurrection becomes real the moment that she realizes that it was Jesus talking to her. And I believe there's several things that we learn here. First, Jesus knew her. He knew her name. He knew who she was. He knew that this was Mary Magdalene that had followed him. He also showed her that he saw her. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, what does that mean? Well, he saw her in her saddened state, in her grief, in her fear, in her depression. He saw her. And last, he loved her. A lot of us, we would, if it was us, we probably would have gotten on to her for, I can't believe that you're sitting here grieving whenever I told you I was coming back. That's not how Jesus handled the situation. He doesn't handle the situation out of anger or frustration. Instead, he handles it with love and compassion. And that's what we find in this moment. So, Easter is not about God undoing death in the vacuous expanse of the universe. Instead, it's about God meeting us in real life. And it's about God showing us that just as Jesus rose from the dead, that he will help us to rise from the places that we find ourselves. Now, Jesus didn't raise from the dead to reinforce the systems that crucified him. He didn't come back to reinforce the Jewish mindset and the things that many people think of when they think of the Jews, when they think of religion. And sadly, much of our religion today is much closer to the religion of the Jews and the attitudes of the Jews than it is to the true attitude of Christ. But see, Jesus didn't come to reinforce that. Jesus didn't come to start a church that was going to treat people the same way the Jews treated people. He rose from the dead so that he could expose these things in life. He rose from the dead to liberate those that were once held silent: the needy, the poor, the sick, the widow, the orphan, the lost, the foreigner. He rose from the dead so that he could gather those who had scattered. Because if you remember, whenever he died, many people scattered. They didn't know what to do. They thought for sure that just as he died, that they would be put to death. You know, he rose from the dead so that each of us, especially those of us who have always struggled and have always had a life that we didn't feel like we were perfect. He rose from the dead to tell us that he loves us. He has a love for me. He has a love for you. Jesus rose from the dead to show them that they didn't have to fear. They didn't have to be shameful, that they didn't have to deal with the injustices of the Jews and the Romans. But he rose from the dead to bring a breakthrough in their life. So Easter invites us to rise with Christ. It invites us to rise against all of the things that we've been told, all of the traditions, all of the attitudes, all of the people that have always kind of made us feel bad about ourselves. But we can rise above that. We can rise above all of the lies that the world has ever told us. We can rise above the rejection and the abandonment that we've felt. Because I'm telling you, these people, they felt abandoned by Christ. When Jesus died, they felt abandoned. There's no way around that. But Jesus rose from the dead to show them that they could rise above that. He also rose from the dead to show them that they could rise together, one another. She runs back to the disciples and told them. She runs back to the disciples and said, "Hey, I've seen the Lord. Not only is his body not there, but I've actually seen him alive." Instead of keeping it to herself and hiding, she wanted to spread the good news to others. She wanted to help them and to bring the good news to their lives. Jesus also rose from the dead to defeat death, but also to defeat the system that brought him death. And he confronted it with courage and with hope. So today, as we're here, I want you to think about this. As we're celebrating the resurrection of Christ, as we're celebrating all that Christ has done for us, I want you to realize that you're not stuck. You're not in a place to where even when you look around and you feel like your life is kind of going nowhere, you're not stuck. You're not stuck in the mud and mire and the muck of life, because you can have hope in Jesus Christ. You're also not forgotten. Mary found out that she was not forgotten because Jesus knew her and he called her by name. You know, it's not too late. It's not too late for you in your life to truly understand what God is doing and how God wants to use you and keep you and provide for you. And the other thing is, you're not too broken. Many times we find ourselves in those places of despair, right? Those places to where we feel like there's no reason to go on. There's just absolutely nothing else that we can do. But you know, we're not too broken, because Jesus, when he overcame death, he overcame illness, he overcame brokenness. And the Bible tells us that the same spirit that rose Jesus from the dead has come to live inside of us. So today, as we close, I hope you may feel the warmth of the resurrection in your spirit today. May you sense the calling of God calling out your name in tenderness. May you rise into the fullness of who you are, not be filled with despair, doubt, depression, and fear. And may the hope of the risen Christ meet you exactly where you are and lead you forward in courage, joy, and belonging. Because Christ is risen, and because he lives, we can rise too. Thank you. God bless, and we'll see y'all next week.